Hunter Biden's federal gun trial begins today with jury selection in Wilmington, Delaware.
I feel motivated that I know he's going to do the best job to let them know, hey, you're picking on the wrong person.
Well, the people that are already supporting him are already going to vote for him. And even the people that are undecided are not going to be swung either way. They're going to be going towards the issues.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We begin tonight, as we have for most nights over the past several weeks, at the courthouse, but not this time to cover a presidential candidate. Instead, it's for the president's son. We'll go to Wilmington, Delaware in a moment. And speaking of that other trial that we had been covering for all those weeks, we have new CBS News polling and reaction from voters after the presumptive Republican nominee for president, Donald Trump, was convicted of 34 felony counts. Our polling unit is tracking Americans' views of the justice system in the wake of Trump's conviction. More on that from our data desk in a moment. But we begin now with Robert Costa and Scott McFarland joining us now and covering all ends of this. Scott, I want to start with you because you are in Wilmington, and we understand that a jury has just been seated. We have a jury of 12 and 4 alternates being decided to serve in this case. How did both sides go about choosing the jury here?
Took the full day, Caitlin, to find a jury here. It's 6 men, 6 women with 4 alternates, and that sets them up for opening arguments tomorrow in a trial that could last an estimated 1 to 2 weeks, and it involves the first ever criminal charges against a president's son that go to a criminal trial. Some of the questions are traditional for jury selection. Do you know the lawyers? Do you know the parties involved? Are you a lawyer? Have you had issues with this court? And some of the questions were also peculiar or particular to this case. The one that seemed to be the most resonant with the prospective jurors was question number 27. Do you believe the Department of Justice and law enforcement bring cases for political reasons? Prospective jurors who answered yes to that question were brought before the judge to answer further questions from her and further questions from the lawyers. There were some who believed that, yes, the Department of Justice has political motivations, and some of them referenced Donald Trump's conviction in Manhattan last week. One of the final jurors who was removed at a defense attorney or a prosecutor's recommendation was somebody who says she believes the Department of Justice brings cases to victimize the Bidens and Democrats. This was a resonant issue and a transcendent issue through this day. But they found 16 people with whom both sides are comfortable, 16 people with whom they will plow forward with opening arguments tomorrow morning.
And Bob, I know you have just returned from covering all those weeks of the Trump trial, but I want to ask about this one. Does this have any impact on the president's reelection campaign?
Speaking to sources close to President Biden, it's clear that he views this as a personal family matter. He issued a statement in support of his son earlier today, but his campaign is focused on the economy and raising issues about former President Trump's conduct, not specifically about this trial, though his campaign did make a lone appearance in Lower Manhattan. It's about the broader case that President Biden believes he's more of an advocate for American democracy, and in his argument, Trump's a threat to American democracy. And so that's what you're hearing from the Biden campaign. That's what you're hearing from President Biden. Not any sort of interest or action that wades into the Hunter Biden situation beyond solidarity from the First Lady, Jill Biden, by appearing at the courthouse today.
And you mentioned Jill Biden. And Scott, we actually have some video of Jill Biden leaving the courtroom today. Scott, what has the Biden team said about this trial publicly? And also, can you give us a sense of, if you were able to get a glimpse of Hunter Biden and kind of assess his demeanor, kind of how he was responding to this jury selection?
And the Biden legal team has indicated what they're going to argue at trial in their pretrial filings. The charges here allege that Hunter Biden knowingly bought a gun in 2018, filled out the paperwork, and did not mark down that he was a user or an addict of drugs. A federal felony, according to prosecutors. What the Biden team is poised to argue, what they have said in their pretrial filings, is that Hunter Biden was in rehab, trying to recuperate during that period of time in which he bought the gun, indicating that, whether you're a drug user is not a scientific idea, maybe more open to people's interpretation or their opinions. That's where they're headed with this argument. But they have to wait until the prosecutors reveal their case first. When Jill Biden arrived here, the First Lady, on her 73rd birthday, no less, she sat right behind Hunter Biden in the courtroom for this jury selection process. Hunter Biden didn't show much expression during this process, but I can tell you, having been there outside the room, he and his defense attorneys called for a last-minute private room huddle at the very end of jury selection so they can make a decision after meeting privately as to who to strike with their final few jury strikes. He was engaged in that meeting. He seemed to be engaged with the attorneys through the process today. He will be a listener only starting tomorrow when the prosecution begins questioning its witnesses.
And Bob, how has the Trump campaign or Republicans more broadly been responding to this trial? I mean, they've used Hunter Biden or tried to use Hunter Biden as a foil throughout the former president's legal troubles. And of course, Hunter Biden will have another trial date later in the fall. But how are they kind of using today, especially after the conviction last week?
Across the Republican Party, there's a lot of interest in supporting former President Trump, and his campaign has raised tens of millions of dollars since the verdict came last week in New York. At the same time, former President Trump has brought up Hunter Biden on the campaign trail from time to time. There was that refrain, "Where's Hunter?" over a year ago. They kind of have taunted Hunter Biden and his problems over the years. But you don't see this as a focus for the Trump campaign. Even for them, they politically and sometimes even personally very much dislike President Biden and his family. But this is a family matter. And among my top Republican sources on the strategy side, they don't see much political upside to bringing a spotlight onto Hunter Biden day in, day out. It's not like it's going to win over a new voter by talking about Hunter Biden using a firearm or purchasing a firearm, talking about his addiction. Of most interest to them is talking about Hunter Biden's laptop and how they believe that might have influenced or not influenced the election enough previously. But when it comes to this particular case, there's not a lot of Republican interest, even from the Trump campaign, in bringing it to the fore of the campaign.
Yeah, interesting to see how Republicans are reacting to the conviction. I want to play a little bit of Doug Burgum, who was on Face the Nation over the weekend. Here's what he had to say.
So Americans are going to come back to the issues that affect them because this trial outcome doesn't affect them. The inflation affects them.
It does.
So, Bob, Doug Burgum, obviously a close ally of former President Trump, rumored to be a potential running mate for former President Trump, was a presidential candidate himself. But it was interesting to hear him there because, saying that voters care about other things. But at the same time, as you mentioned, the campaign has raised a lot of money off this convention. So to the extent that we can, just, a few days removed from this conviction, how do you see this conviction playing out politically at this point?
Based on my conversations with people close to Trump, Governor Burgum is near the top of the list to be Trump's running mate. And it's because he threads the needle. Inside the Trump wing, he's somewhat popular. He's also popular, or at least respected, among traditional Republicans. He's not exactly a well-known name yet fully, even inside the Republican Party. But he is someone who is trying to bring the issues of the Trump campaign to be part of the conversation. And for Trump, who has relied so much on his own grievances to fuel his campaign, having someone like Burgum out there being a different kind of presenter, talking about issues in a different sort of way, that provides value to the Trump campaign. And that's why Burgum continues to rise.
Interesting. And Scott, we've seen, Republicans come to the former president's defense, but we've also seen over the past couple of years almost them really kind of focus on Hunter Biden here. How are Republicans, you cover Congress so well, how are Republicans reacting to today and the trial to come later this fall?
There are some House Republicans who are taking some indirect credit for the fact this trial's happening. You'll recall, Caitlin and Bob, this case was nearly pleaded out last year. They were on the precipice, at the altar for a plea agreement, and the judge, the same judge overseeing this trial, didn't believe both sides were on the same page, and she blew that plea agreement up. And that set us on a trajectory towards trial now. But there were House Republican committees who filed in that case with concerns about what they heard about the plea deal. And of course, Caitlin, Hunter Biden has been a common word or words to be heard in Republican House committee hearing rooms over the past few months. They've questioned his business dealings. They've alleged that he has traded off the family name to enrich himself, something he has denied. And they are now watching from a distance, from 2 hours away, as Hunter Biden goes on trial with opening arguments tomorrow morning.
All right, and our court coverage continues. Bob Costa and Scott McFarland, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And how is former President Trump's guilty verdict impacting voters in Pennsylvania? We're in that battleground state next to see if the decision is changing anyone's vote. You're streaming America Decides. It's been 4 days since Donald Trump became the first U.S. president to be convicted of a crime, and reactions to the verdict have been widely divided throughout the nation. That includes across the battleground state of Pennsylvania, where we now find our own Torian Small. Torian, good to see you. I know you've been talking to voters all day there where you are in Pennsylvania since the trial came to a close. Can you give us a sense of how people are reacting 4 days out?
Caitlin, I know this wouldn't be a surprise to you, but voters here aren't paying as close attention to the Trump trials, as many criminal trials or cases as we are in D.C. and in New York. But many of them say they pay attention to the headlines. And almost immediately after the verdict came in, a lot of voters tell me they thought exactly of this trial as they did before it even started. Republicans are pretty dug in. They believe that this was unfair persecution of a former president, a political opponent of the current president. And Democrats and independents, however, say that they trust the process. Take a listen to what a few of the folks in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, just an hour north of Philadelphia, had to say.
I think it was a fair trial, and it was a process and multiple steps. But I mean, I think the truth prevailed.
They went after him big time in New York City, and the guy wanted to prove that, you know, he's, again, Democratic DA, Democratic city. So they basically cornered him.
Many Republicans I talked to, including folks who were on the fence about supporting Trump. That last guy you just heard from said that he was originally a supporter of Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, but ultimately decided to lean into President Trump's second run or third run for office in the hopes that he gets a second term because of these mounting legal challenges against the former president.
That's interesting, Torian, because that is helps to answer some of the questions that we've had about whether this, in fact, converts anybody to Trump's side. We've seen Trump and Republicans on Capitol Hill and throughout the country really, railing on the U.S. justice system in the wake of this verdict. Are we seeing voters respond to that in any way, too?
I think a lot of Republicans are parroting what they're hearing from the top. So Republicans I talked to say that, yes, this is an unfair abuse of the criminal justice system. But a lot of them still did have faith in it. They say that maybe Donald Trump is a blip in what they've seen so far been fairly just. But Democrats that I talked to say that they're concerned that Donald Trump is being made into a martyr, further mobilizing a crucial part of his base to come out in November. Take a listen to a few folks I talked to as well.
I don't think it's rigged for him, it's rigged for us. Like we're the tiny man, common man. We're gonna get punched down upon. People like him who have a ton of money, they're ultimately fine.
I'd like it to be more fair than it is. Sometimes it's more like, let's go more for the political side, and that saddens me. It's not what once made America great.
Isaac Felix, the first guy you heard from there, 19-year-old, this will be his first time voting for president. And interestingly enough, he said while he does lean left or more moderate center left, he says that this time around he's probably thinking third party, probably not RFK Jr., but he's open to considering other things. On the note of the criminal justice system, he says, listen, like you heard him say, it's not the folks with privilege, in his mind, Donald Trump, who are being unjustly targeted by the courts. It's other folks, people who don't have the money or access.
Yeah, and Torian, it's so great to hear from these voters that you're talking to, especially because they're in Pennsylvania, which is such a critical battleground state this time around and has been in the past. Can you talk to us a little bit about the significance of Pennsylvania? I mean, we've seen Biden go there a lot. Do we expect Trump to go there more now that his trial has ended?
Especially Biden. I mean, he's been out here quite a few times. Kamala Harris, the vice president, has been out here quite a few times. And they've also opened up this expansive outreach operation, over 14 field offices across the state, all in the hopes of holding down that winning coalition that helped him cross the finish line in 2020. If Biden's work here ahead of November is to rebuild or fortify that crucial blue wall that helped him secure the nomination in 2020, Pennsylvania is a crucial brick. Just 80,000 votes in 2020 is what helped him ultimately win the White House. He's hoping to win over those same voters this time around as well.
Well, we are glad you were there reporting for us then, and we'll continue to. Torian Small, thank you so much.
This was a rigged, disgraceful trial, but the real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people.
And we have new post-verdict polling. After weeks of railing against the legal system, do Americans agree with former President Trump's claims about a witch hunt? We've got the numbers next on America Decides.
People get it. It's a scam. And the Republican Party is really, they stick together in this. They see it's weaponization.
Former President Donald Trump has been casting doubt on the justice system in the wake of his guilty verdict in the New York criminal case. But do Americans agree with him? Well, we have CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, with us to share his post-verdict polling. Say that 3 times fast, Anthony. So you've been talking to voters. How are they thinking about the justice system?
I want to start with this, Caitlin. Does the case make you more or less confident in the system as a whole? And yeah, these are the breaks, but let me show you the partisan breaks because it really speaks to what you just showed in the in that earlier clip. First of all, you have, are these crimes serious? Look at the number of Republicans who say, no, these crimes are not serious. Those are big numbers right there. 75% saying not very, not at all. And then I'm going to slide over here and go back to that take on the justice system as a whole. And similar, 3/4 of Republicans say this case has made them less confident in the system. Now, look, some of this is the emotion, the response to the moment, right? There are many Republicans who say that they're angry about this or disappointed. But the larger context here, when you talk about that political rhetoric about going after or criticizing the system as a whole, this, I think, is really important and important to watch because it underpins, at least for Republicans, why maybe the president's arguments are going to resonate.
And what about their views of the trial itself? I mean, we were all trying to assess how voters were feeling about this and the hypothetical about Trump if he were convicted. Well, now we actually have a verdict. What is kind of the reality about how people are viewing all of this?
Well, the fact is, before the verdict, when we interviewed people, if they thought, even going in before the verdict, that he was guilty, they were much more likely on the other side to think that the jury had reached the right verdict and that Donald Trump had gotten a fair trial. Here again, sort of similar story. You see these big partisan splits. And one of the reasons that is important going forward is, let's go back to what you introduced at the top. For Republicans, do they want to see the party remain loyal to the former president? And yeah, we get big numbers saying it's very important to Republicans, to the rank and file, that the party do that. And that, again, explains why you're seeing so many Republican officials, elected officials, et cetera, coming to his defense, Caitlin.
And we heard from Torian Small in our earlier block talking to voters in Pennsylvania, for example, and it seemed like they were all kind of coming down on partisan lines. But I'm curious from your polling what you have found, whether people are dug into their views or is there any room for movement here?
I think there's 2 parts to that answer. One is this a disqualifying event? Does this make Donald Trump not fit to be president, right? That's half the country. Well, that speaks more to the partisan divide. Republicans tend to say that he is still fit. But the other part of this is attention. Maybe there's some room for movement if we take the folks, and then not everybody's, a lot of people are following it, yes, not everybody's following it very closely. Maybe there's room in this lower third here who haven't been And that's important to watch as really both campaigns start to contextualize this and maybe make arguments around it, Caitlin.
Yeah, especially with 5 whole months to go before voters actually decide. Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much. It's a great snapshot.
Thank you.
And the tale of 2 campaigns. As President Biden celebrates Pride Month, former President Trump's campaign looks to cash in on its guilty verdict. Our political panel is ready to break down all of the big headlines from the campaign trail for streaming America Decides.
My revenge will be success, and I mean that. But it's awfully hard when you see what they've done. These people are so evil.
The Trump campaign says they are bringing in millions of dollars in donations after the former president's conviction. Meanwhile, the Biden campaign is rolling out a media blitz for Pride Month, hoping to shore up support from the LGBTQ community. Let's bring in our panel, Molly Ball and Lauren Egan. Molly is a senior political correspondent for The Wall Street Journal, and Lauren is White House reporter for Politico. Great to have you both with us today. A lot to get to from over the weekend. But let's talk about this Trump fundraising. I mean, Republicans, their win-red fundraising system broke down after the verdict. Trump and related campaigns have raised millions and millions of dollars off of this. Not entirely surprising, but Molly, it does speak to the level of support here. And I'm kind of curious whether this has any potential to convert voters.
Well, that's the real question. I think it's exactly the right question, because this fundraising is coming from Trump's hardcore base, right? And it's not totally organic. I got more text from Trump since the verdict than normally they're like pretty sporadic, and they've been sending them constantly. So they're also, I think, ginning up this fundraising from their base as a way to build this narrative that about how angry the Republican base is over the verdict. Nevertheless, it is a real phenomenon. But the question that you asked is the right one, because he already has those votes, right? And it doesn't say anything about where independents and swing voters are going, how they are feeling about the verdict. And that is what's going to matter. And that is what, with all due respect to the polling you just talked about, I don't think we're going to know for at least a few weeks.
How this all settles in. I mean, one thing it does do is help to at least catch up to Biden in terms of fundraising, because Biden has had a wide lead. This certainly helps Trump in that endeavor. But I'm curious how Democrats have been strategizing around this indictment, or this conviction, I should say, and whether they are changing anything that they're doing.
Yeah, I think this is something you've constantly heard from the White House and from Biden aides. When they talk about Biden's polling numbers, they said, we're not too worried because we have such an enormous fundraising lead. Last month, the FEC report that came out last month showed that Trump was starting to catch up a bit. So certainly when these numbers rolled in over these past day or two, it's worried Democrats who have felt so reassured in the fact that they have this enormous war chest. Now that Trump might be chipping into that, there's some concern. And you've seen Joe Biden's campaign as well, sending out text messages alluding to this conviction. But they've been a lot less aggressive in terms of leaning into this. I think there's some uncertainty in the party and how exactly it's going to all play out. And there's just some anxiousness about how hard do they really go on this conviction.
Yeah, and it's a kind of difficult political situation, right? You normally would want to capitalize on whatever your opponent is going through, but you're also at the same time being accused by said opponent and the Republican Party of being political with your own Justice Department. So, it was interesting to me, Molly, that last week we did see the Biden team send surrogates to the trial. After, saying essentially that we're going to let this speak for itself. I'm wondering if you see any sort of benefit to engaging in this.
Well, it's been a real debate among Democrats. I think, as Lauren alluded to, there's been one school of thought that says, the president has to be really careful to sort of safeguard the rule of law by staying as far away from this as possible. But on the political side of the party, there's a feeling that because Trump was so aggressively politically messaging around the trial, there was a lopsided feeling in the narrative, and they needed and just the idea, I think, among a lot of Democratic political practitioners, that if your opponent is a convicted felon and you're not trying to capitalize politically on that fact, it's sort of political malpractice. But anytime they do that, they just inflame the idea and the widespread perception that the trial itself was the political creation of the Democratic Party going after Trump, persecuting him, prosecuting him just because he's their political opponents. So he does have them in a bit of a bind in that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we have seen, obviously, for months and months and months, the rhetoric from Republicans led by Donald Trump, denigrating the justice system. And now we have today the opening jury selection for Hunter Biden. Same justice system, right? Different state, but this is federal, actually. How is Biden handling all of this now that his son, we saw Jill Biden obviously go to court today. Biden did not go himself. But can you speak a little bit about kind of what Biden is going through in this Hunter Biden case?
Yeah, look, I think Biden comes at this from the position of being a dad and a father in this. He put out a statement today. The White House rarely weighs in on these issues. And the president put out a statement today really leaning into the fact that this was an emotional time for his family, that he said he was proud of his son and he was, loved his son. He, made very clear that he was not weighing in on the actual case itself. But there's really no question that this has weighed really heavy on the president. He spent the weekend with Hunter in Wilmington and at the beach at their beach house. And this is all coming on the backdrop of Biden is about to go overseas. He's headed to France tomorrow evening. Aides to him have said that, he's going to be checking in with his son this whole time. He'll certainly be following the coverage. But obviously, as a father, that sits really heavy on your heart as he's still doing all the presidential duties that he has to do this week.
Yeah. Speaking of overseas, Molly, I know you just returned from overseas following a congressional CODEL to Asia. Are they following this election? How closely are people following what's happening here?
Yeah, several members of Congress went first to Taiwan to be the first to meet with the new Taiwanese president who was just elected, and then to Singapore, where there's a national security conference, the annual Shangri-La Dialogue, where the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met for the first time face-to-face with his Chinese counterpart. So the, China's influence in the region and the increased tensions, not only between China and Taiwan, but between China and the U.S., are the backdrop for all this. But what you really learn, I think, anywhere overseas these days is how closely they are all following the American election and how much the stakes of the vote in November have the entire world on edge, as many world leaders feel that Donald Trump's first term was highly destabilizing and he's a very unpredictable figure. I think his defenders would say that was all to the good, and we've had many foreign crises break out on Biden's watch. But certainly the world is watching the American election very closely and very nervously.
Another, interesting development that has happened over the past few days that may have been buried is that Joe Manchin, who has long been a West Virginia Democrat, has now announced that he is going to be an independent. Of course, there was a vigorous Republican primary for that seat. Should we read into any of this? Does this mean that he is coming back? I mean, he says he's retiring.
It's funny because he did get a lot of questions because he did it right before the filing deadline, and there had been these rumors in West Virginia all year that he might either refile in the Senate race as an independent or that he might get into the gubernatorial race. He was a former governor, to this day says it's the best job he's ever had, hated to leave it and go to the Senate. He has said, not totally definitively, that he's not going to run for anything else. And he has been teasing this move away from the Democratic Party for quite a long time. So his official rationale for doing this is just that it gives him more space to operate after he leaves the Senate, which he will do after this election.
And I mean, that seat is going to be consequential in terms of whoever controls the Senate. Another interesting development over the weekend was Larry Hogan, the former Maryland governor, who is running for the Senate in Maryland as a Republican. He released a statement saying, after the verdict, essentially saying, the rule of law, we have to respect the rule of law here. The Trump campaign really has gone after him. And you had Lara Trump, now a co-chair of the RNC, essentially say, we don't want anything to do with him. If he's saying
upsetting.
Upsetting, yes, very upset. And I'm curious kind of how, that to me kind of shows the way in which the Republican Party is essentially operating now, right? In terms of kind of get behind us, we are the party now.
Right. I think it's classic Trump. You have to, show loyalty to him, even when you're in a state like Maryland, where Larry Hogan was probably pretty boxed in that case. It's hard to imagine winning a state that's as blue as Maryland without sort of going against the Republican Party in some areas right there. But yeah, I think it speaks to the larger way that the Republican Party is operating. And also it's interesting when you look at how divided the Democrats are about how to respond to this conviction, as opposed to Larry Hogan really stood out there because he's basically one of the only Republicans that we've seen come out so forcefully, and it just shows just the dramatically different approaches that the two parties are taking to this.
Yeah, that's super interesting because he was really kind of the lone voice in the Republican Party.
It wasn't even that forceful. It was actually before the verdict he put out the statement, and he said no matter what the verdict is, we should respect it. Right. He didn't say he agreed with it. He didn't say that Trump is a criminal or anything like that. He just said juries should do their jobs.
Right. And
for that, he's being attacked and basically thrown out of the party.
Tells us a lot about where things stand in this party heading into an election that is very, very close. Molly and Lauren, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. And President Biden is expected to issue a long-anticipated executive order impacting asylum seekers on the southern border. Camilo Montoya Galvez has the latest from El Paso.
President Biden is expected to announce a seismic shift in policy here at the U.S.-Mexico border. We are told that the president is planning to issue an executive order tomorrow to shut down asylum processing here between official border crossings. It would be triggered after daily illegal crossings here soar to 2,500, meaning that it will likely take effect immediately after being issued. It will allow U.S. immigration officials to quickly deport migrants back to Mexico or to their home countries without processing their asylum claims. Importantly, asylum processing will continue at official border crossings. This is a massive policy shift by the Biden administration, but it is very likely to be challenged in federal court. Camilo Montoya Galvez, CBS News, El Paso, Texas.
House lawmakers grill Anthony Fauci over the origins of COVID-19. What he had to say after the break. You're streaming America Decides. We're still roughly 5 months away from Election Day, but one of the most powerful Republicans in Congress is already gearing up to take on large-scale action if Donald Trump returns to the White House. In an exclusive interview with Semaphore, House Speaker Mike Johnson said he plans to push a legislative package that would address a wide range of issues if Trump is reelected in November, and says he believes Trump can be, quote, the most consequential president of the modern era. Kadia Goba, the author of this article, joins us now from Semaphore. Good to see you, Kadia. Thanks so much for being here. I want to get to your interview in just a moment, but you also cover Capitol Hill. And on Capitol Hill today, Dr. Anthony Fauci was grilled by lawmakers on the origins of COVID-19. I'm going to play a little bite from the hearing and we'll talk about it.
We should be recommending you to be prosecuted. We should be writing a criminal referral because you should be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. You belong in prison, Dr. Fauci.
Some of our colleagues in the United States House of Representatives seem to want to drag your name through the mud. They're treating you, Dr. Fauci, like a convicted felon. Actually, you probably wish they were treating you like a convicted felon. They treat convicted felons with love and admiration.
Ooh, all right. So what are they trying to accomplish here in this hearing, essentially, politically?
So, yeah, surprisingly, I like to look at this as sort of a period on the whole COVID thing. This was Republicans didn't have a chance to grill Fauci in the past. If you recall, this committee originated during COVID. So Democrats were in control, and their main objective was, making sure that people addressed certain issues that were going on. Republicans have always pushed back about the origins of COVID and really, really punched Democrats in the face about not having a hearing. I think this means that there's going to be a closure to this hearing or to this committee, and this would be the end of it. But there was a lot of tension because Republicans finally got a moment to ask Fauci about the origins.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if this becomes or continues to be a campaign issue as we get closer. I do want to ask about your interview with Mike Johnson, though, because it was really revealing about kind of the legislative agenda that he hopes to push if Trump is elected, and he seems to be assuming that if that happens, then Republicans would also keep their majority in both in the House and gain one in the Senate. What did he tell you about his approach?
Yeah, I was surprised. It was pretty ambitious. He wants to use this kind of legislative magic called reconciliation with the assumption that Republicans will have the executive branch and both the Senate and the House and push through some legislation, but like a lot of legislation, like on immigration, obviously the big tax, all the tax measures that are expiring, as well as some energy stuff. I don't know if that's going to happen. Well, first of all, they have to win all of those seats. They have to win the presidential. But I thought it was very ambitious. He said he wanted to, do all of that. Some of it is probably messaging to like say, voters, give us the House. This is what we'll do. Or give us the presidency. This is what we'll do. But I thought it was very aggressive and unlike what historically reconciliation even does at this point.
Right, because usually it's used just for kind of tax measures, and it would be essentially a way to be able to pass things without the higher majority.
Avoiding the filibuster in the Senate.
Exactly, but it was interesting to me because it seemed also like he had been in close contact with the former president himself. We know that they've met recently. He came to his defense at the trial. Did it tell you anything about that sort of relationship or what that relationship might be if, in fact, Trump is elected? Yeah, when the team actually outlined what each leader's position was in this, they essentially said that Johnson was the person that was going to be the liaison to the administration. So I thought that was very telling and very presumptuous that he would be the speaker going into 2025. Again, I think also probably a great messaging tool for him to talk to some of the Republicans to say, hey, I have Donald Trump's back. This is what we are going to do together. And to kind of say, hey, we're in this together. Also, he mentioned, too, that he had learned from past mistakes or that Republicans had learned from past mistakes legislatively. What exactly was he referring to? So typically with the reconciliation, you want to focus on one specific item and push that forward. And that's what he's saying. He's saying he's not going to be that conservative. He's going to be very broad and, trying to establish a lot. I'm not sure that's going to work. It did not work for Democrats a few years ago. So we'll see. I think they have the best chance of pushing through the tax measures, though. All right, we will see. Kadia, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. And Texas Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee says she has been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The 74-year-old Democrat says she's currently undergoing treatment and plans to be present for as many votes as she can. Lee was first elected to Congress in 1994. She recently won a Democratic primary challenge and faces a contest for re-election this November. In 2012, Lee said that she was cancer-free, and that was a year after being diagnosed with breast cancer. Well, a historic win in Mexico as the country elects its first female president. What Claudia Sheinbaum's win means for relations with our neighbors to the south. You're streaming America Decides. Mexico has elected its first female president. Claudia Sheinbaum's decisive victory also makes her Mexico's first Jewish president. The 61-year-old is a climate scientist who served as the mayor of Mexico City. Sheinbaum has promised to continue her predecessor's social welfare programs, including a universal pension for the elderly. She will begin her 6-year term on October 1st. Maya Averbach joins us now. She's an economy and government reporter for Bloomberg News in their Mexico bureau. Maya, so good to see you. Thanks for being here. So can you walk us through the new president's background and what policies she's advocated for?
So Sheinbaum has been part of Morena for many years. She was part of the founding of the party and someone who's been very close to the current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. She's worked with him since the early 2000s when he himself was mayor. And she sort of rose through the ranks of local politics to become the Mexico City mayor, really focused on issues of security, on greening the city, on issues of education. And that launched her career within the party so that she could become the candidate and eventually win the election with a really huge margin.
And Mexico, of course, has struggled with both cartel crime and political violence. Has she made any public plans for combating violence in the country?
She's certainly talked about it as one of the issues that she's going to deal with in her government. She invested a lot in police in Mexico City and pushed for them to have more investigative capacities, and has talked about bringing part of that strategy to the national level. She's also said she's going to move forward with working with the National Guard, which is a body that was created under AMLO, a partly militarized security body that has expanded across the country, and she wants to move forward with that as another part of her security strategy, knowing that it's going to be a really key part of how her government does and is a really key issue for Mexican voters who feel the consequences of it every day.
And obviously, this is a huge headline, electing their first woman president. But I think there would also be a lot of interest here in the U.S., of course, no matter who was elected, because of U.S.-Mexico relations and how important they are. What kind of impact could she have on this relationship?
I think she's looking really closely to see what the U.S. government is going to look like by the end of this year, and that will determine a lot of what these two countries' relationship will be in terms of trade, in terms of collaboration on security issues. The current president, AMLO, has had a cordial relationship with Biden, and in some ways an even more positive relation with Trump, surprisingly. And she has said that she would be on good terms with any U.S. leader. But obviously the relationship would be very different. The two countries also have to take another look at the free trade agreement along with Canada. They're going to have a review of that. And so a lot hangs in the balance, both for Mexico's economy as a country that exports a ton of goods every year to the U.S., and in terms of how much the U.S. government will also try to put pressure on Mexico with issues like immigration and security that have become really key in this U.S. election cycle.
Yeah, defining issues in this election. Well, a historic one in Mexico, and we'll all be staying tuned to what happens here as well. Maya, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And finally tonight, a member of Congress's son appeared to take his father's advice a little too seriously today on the House floor. Republican Congressman John Rose of Tennessee told his kid to smile at the camera during his floor remarks, and here was the result.
Driven prosecution and now conviction of a major political party nominee running for president, especially on the charges brought against Donald Trump, should gravely concern every member of this body.
Congressman Rose tweeted, quote, "This is what I get for telling my son Guy to smile at the camera for his little brother." I know how that goes. Well, that does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.